I never imagined that love could feel so heavy, like a stone pressing into your chest day after day. Yet somehow, that was the truth of my life now. For decades, I had poured myself into my family, late nights helping with homework, early mornings preparing breakfasts, endless sacrifices that went unnoticed. I was the anchor, the silent supporter, the one who never complained. And yet, as I sat in my living room, the house humming with the echoes of laughter I was no longer invited to, I felt invisible, a burden my own family couldn't be bothered to carry with respect. At first, the small slights were subtle. A passing comment about how mom always worries too much, a sigh heavy with impatience when I suggested dinner plans, or the polite nod as they waved me off during family decisions that once mattered. Each gesture alone could be dismissed, but strung together, they wove a tapestry of exclusion. I remembered the birthdays I organized meticulously, the nights I stayed awake caring for fevers, the times I had given up my own desires so my children could thrive. And now, I was treated as if my very presence was an inconvenience. The contrast between the devotion I had poured into their lives and the cold indifference they offered in return made my heart ache. It wasn't just the children. My spouse, though loving in memory, had passed years ago, leaving me in a house that felt simultaneously empty and overcrowded with others' entitlement. Even neighbors and friends, those who once admired my generosity, seemed to forget me, caught up in their own busy lives. The silence was louder than any insult, a constant reminder of how invisible one could become when utility, not affection, dictated attention. I found myself walking through the house like a shadow, touching objects that held memories, each one a testament to years of love unreturned. Yet, despite the sting of rejection, I refused to give voice to anger. Anger would have made me small in a different way, reactive, bitter, obvious. Instead, I observed. I watched the subtle negotiations over money, the quiet squabbles about who would host holidays, who would claim heirlooms, who would benefit from my weakening presence. They rationalized their behavior as practicality. She doesn't need to know. She's too old to worry. But I knew the truth. It was entitlement, greed cloaked in manners. And beneath my quiet exterior, I was not as powerless as they believed. Some days I would sit at the kitchen table, tea in hand, and listen to the conversations drifting from the living room. My son debated with his wife over renovations, their voices tinged with frustration, as if I were a ghost intruding upon a reality they thought belonged only to them. I could see the impatience on their faces when I offered advice, an echo of the countless times they had ignored my counsel. And yet, I felt a strange serenity. They didn't know that I was planning, that I had long prepared for this moment in ways invisible to them. My life had taught me the power of patience, the quiet accumulation of leverage. While they boasted of their accomplishments, I had quietly ensured that my own life, though overlooked, had its own strength. It wasn't always easy to remain composed. I felt the pangs of loneliness sharply, particularly during evenings when the house was filled with voices not meant for me, laughter that skirted around my own presence. I would retreat to my bedroom, sometimes to cry, sometimes just to sit in silence. And yet, in those moments of solitude, I also reminded myself of my value. I had been the scaffolding of this family, the one who had held it together when storms came. That strength didn't vanish simply because recognition did. And I sensed, deep within, that the world has a way of balancing scales, often when least expected. Hints of that balance began to show subtly, almost imperceptibly. I found myself reflecting on the legal arrangements I had long kept in order. Files neatly stored, accounts organized, the will drafted years ago with care and intention. It was not cruelty that guided me, but foresight. I was determined that my final actions would speak louder than the years of quiet dismissal ever could. The irony that my family, so confident in their entitlement, would soon discover, gave me a measure of private satisfaction. Each day, as I endured slight after slight, my resolve hardened. The contrast between my apparent weakness and my true control became a kind of secret power. They saw frailty, I saw clarity. They saw dependence, I knew independence. And so I played my part, continuing to engage politely, offering advice, sometimes even helping when asked, all while keeping my intentions quietly to myself. There was an art in this silence, a deliberate packing that would allow the story to unfold exactly as it should. Every ignored suggestion, every eye roll, every dismissive, "It's fine, Mom," was feeding into the tension that would later make the revelation all the more potent. Health, however, was no longer something I could entirely control. Subtle ailments crept in, aches that weren't there yesterday, fatigue that lingered, small but telling signs of age catching up. One morning, as I struggled to climb the stairs, I felt the reality of my mortality sharpen. It was not debilitating, but enough to make me reflect on urgency. The family, meanwhile, treated these signs as confirmation of their assumptions, that I was fatting, that I was a burden, that the careful planning and wisdom accumulated over decades could now be dismissed as irrelevant. Their conversations about my care, whispered in the hallway, were tinged with exasperation and impatience, rather than concern. A turning point arrived one late afternoon, when my son and his wife came over to discuss my living arrangements. Their tone, calm on the surface, carried undercurrents of irritation. They debated about moving me closer to them, framing it as concern for my well-being. But in truth, their words were laced with subtle resentment, more about convenience than love. I listened, smiling faintly, my calm demeanor masking the sharp awareness beneath. They did not know that I had already thought through every possible outcome, that I had quietly decided the timing and manner in which the truth of my intentions would emerge. In that moment, the contrast between their perception of me and my actual position could not have been starker. To them, I was weak, dependent, expendable. To myself, I was composed, deliberate, in command of a narrative they did not even suspect existed. And though my health had its limits, my mind was precise, calculating, and prepared. This balance, between fragility and quiet authority, was the secret thread holding the first act of this story together. As the conversation ended, they left with their assumptions intact, leaving me in a silence that felt almost sacred. I moved through the house, touching objects that held years of memories, reflecting on the immense emotional labor I had carried, the sacrifices I had made silently. Each piece of furniture, each photograph, each carefully preserved memento was a testament not only to love given freely, but to the resilience built in obscurity. And though my body was aging, my resolve remained steadfast. I knew the next chapter would demand more than observation. It would demand timing, patience, and the subtle orchestration of events to reveal the truth I had safeguarded for so long. The day would come when the scales of recognition would shift, when the quiet strength I had carried would be undeniable, and when those who had treated me as a burden would confront the reality of their assumptions. The tension was mounting, and I could feel it in the rhythm of my days, in the careful steps I took through a house that was mine, even if they did not realize it. And so I continued, smiling when greeted with indifference, nodding when advice was dismissed, quietly noting the patterns of behavior, the petty rivalries, the greed masked as pragmatism. Each day was both endurance and preparation. Each slight, each dismissive remark only sharpened my awareness, only strengthened my resolve. I understood fully that life does not always reward the visible or the loud. Sometimes, justice arrives quietly, deliberately in the moments that matter most. By the end of this period, the days when my health made its presence known, when subtle ailments whispered urgency, I felt a quiet excitement beneath the surface. The family had no idea of the careful preparations, the precise control I had maintained even while appearing weak. They assumed abandonment, dependence, invisibility, but in truth, I was orchestrating a revelation that would be as impactful as it was inevitable. The first act of the story had set the stage. The weight of being unwanted had exposed their greed and indifference, but it had also revealed my silent strength, the hidden power they could never have anticipated. The evening closed quietly, but with tension that hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. I moved through the house, arranging, reflecting, preparing, and knowing that soon, the world and my family would see what I had always known, that even when treated as a burden, one could wield immense influence, quietly, deliberately, and with unassailable dignity. The stage was set. The family thought they were in control. The next chapter would prove them wrong. The day arrived with a stillness I could almost feel through the walls, a silence that seemed heavier than any sound could ever be. My family had gathered in the lawyer's office, their expressions a mixture of smug expectation and thinly veiled impatience. They all assumed they knew how this story would end. After all, in their eyes, they had been patient, dutiful, and confident, waiting to claim what they believed was theirs by right. They didn't know that patience had never been mine to offer, and that the story I had been quietly crafting for decades was about to unfold in a way no one anticipated. As they shifted in their seats, talking quietly among themselves, I imagined their thoughts. My son, leaning back with a self-assured smirk, convinced of his superiority. His wife, poised and calculating, anticipating a windfall she felt she had earned through charm and obligation. They were certain that they were about to inherit not only wealth, but my approval, my validation, my legacy as they understood it. And yet, from the moment the lawyer entered the room, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The air, once filled with expectation, became taut with suspense. The lawyer, a calm professional with no trace of theatrics, began with a measured tone. "We are here to execute the final wishes of your mother," she said, eyes sweeping the room with quiet authority. She opened the first envelope, and the rustle of paper seemed louder than any voice in the room. I imagined my family leaning forward, eager to grasp what they believed would be theirs. Their sense of entitlement was palpable, a tangible weight pressing against the walls, and I smiled inwardly. The first revelation was small, almost mundane, a modest sum allocated to a local animal shelter, a favorite of mine that my family had barely acknowledged over the years. A ripple of confusion ran through the room. My son frowned. "Why to them?" he asked, incredulous. The lawyer's voice remained steady, almost serene. "Because she valued integrity and compassion. These funds were intended to support those who act with kindness, not merely those who inherit by default." A hush fell over the room. Shock, mixed with disbelief, began to replace confidence. Then came the letters. The lawyer held them carefully, as if understanding the gravity they carried. One by one, she read aloud messages I had left for individuals my family had ignored, outsiders who had shown genuine care, simple acts of integrity that my children had overlooked in their rush to assume entitlement. Each letter revealed the depth of my awareness, the precision with which I had observed who truly deserved recognition. The room grew colder as each name was announced, names that did not include the ones my family expected. My son's frown deepened, his voice trembling slightly. "But we're your children, didn't we?" His question trailed into silence, suffocated by the weight of reality. His wife's hand trembled as she gripped her purse, a physical manifestation of the shock and confusion swirling inside her. I could almost hear the gears turning in their minds as they realized that affection and proximity had not equated to reward. Their assumptions, built on convenience and perceived loyalty, were crumbling. The lawyer paused, allowing the moment to settle. "Your mother believed in rewarding character, not proximity. She understood the difference between obligation and true contribution, and her will reflects that understanding." Every word was deliberate, measured, and irrefutable. This was my voice, my judgment, delivered without anger, without spectacle, but with a precision that could not be denied. Next came the financial allocations. Real estate properties, bank accounts, cherished possessions, distributed in ways that seemed almost poetic in their justice. The house, which had been the center of countless family disputes, was left to a distant niece who had once visited out of genuine concern, not expectation. Investments that my children assumed would line their pockets went to causes I had quietly supported, organizations that embodied integrity, resilience, and care. Every item, every dollar, every deed was a reflection of my priorities, a mirror held up to the values my family had ignored. The contrast between greed and integrity was now undeniable. My family, who had been confident, entitled, and certain, were forced into a new reality, one where their expectations no longer dictated outcomes. Faces turned pale. Eyes darted nervously to each other, searching for explanations that did not exist. The room, once filled with arrogance, was now heavy with humility forced by circumstance. I imagined the thoughts racing through their minds. How could they have been so blind? How had they misjudged me so completely, and yet this was not about punishment, it was about revelation. My choices, methodical and deliberate, were designed not to humiliate, but to illuminate. Each allocation, each letter, each act of recognition was a testament to the values I had cherished, and to the subtle yet undeniable control I had maintained throughout my life. The power I held was quiet, unseen, and absolute, a testament to foresight, patience, and the knowledge that respect and integrity far outweigh superficial loyalty. A moment of silence followed as the lawyer closed the final envelope. My children sat frozen, their hands clenched, their breaths shallow. The room was filled not with anger, but with the quiet realization of accountability. They were not angry at the choices, they were confronting their own actions, their own neglect, and the consequences that had always been inevitable. The air seemed thick with reflection, a tangible weight pressing down on each of them, forcing them to acknowledge what they had ignored for years. I thought of the small acts that had gone unnoticed. The time I stayed up through nights of illness, the countless meals prepared, the tireless support given silently and without expectation. Those moments, once invisible, had now manifested into undeniable influence. My life, my efforts, and my values had not been diminished by neglect. They had been quietly amassed into a force that could not be contested. The lawyer had become my voice, translating years of unseen authority into a tangible, undeniable reality. The emotional climax was stark. My son's eyes glistened, a mixture of regret and shock. His wife's lips trembled, words caught somewhere between apology and disbelief. Others in the room, distant cousins, friends, and onlookers, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the moral weight of the moment. Each person was forced to confront their choices, their priorities, and the uncomfortable truth that proximity does not equal virtue. My life, once overlooked, had spoken louder than words could ever convey. The revelation did not end with disappointment or dismay. It ended with reflection, with an invitation to reconsider values, to measure worth not by entitlement but by character, not by convenience but by integrity. Those who had acted with care, however small or unnoticed, were celebrated and empowered. Those who had sought personal gain at the expense of love were left with the stark mirror of consequence. It was justice, subtle yet undeniable, a reflection of a life lived deliberately, wisely, and with unshakable dignity. As the meeting concluded, I imagined the lingering silence in their minds, the internal reckoning that would continue long after they left the office. They had learned a lesson not through confrontation, but through the quiet assertion of authority, the deliberate orchestration of outcomes that honored the values I held dear. My family had assumed weakness, dependency, and invisibility, but I had remained in control, shaping the final act with precision and foresight. The lawyer gathered the documents, her tone final yet gentle. Your mother's wishes are clear. Let this be a reminder that the life we lead, the integrity we maintain, and the care we show are the true measure of our legacy. The weight of her words settled over the room, a truth undeniable and absolute. My legacy, once invisible to those blinded by expectation, now stood revealed in full clarity. As they filed out, some with tears, others with silent reflection, I imagined the ripple of change this revelation would carry. The lesson was not vengeful, it was instructive. Power had not been wielded to punish, but to reveal, to illuminate, to honor integrity over entitlement. My life, my choices, my quiet strength had spoken louder than any argument, confrontation, or plea ever could. In that moment, I felt an extraordinary peace. The contrast that had defined the first chapter, weakness versus hidden control, abandonment versus quiet resilience, was now resolved. The narrative I had crafted, patiently and deliberately, had reached its natural conclusion. Those who valued greed had faced their reckoning. Those who had acted with integrity, however overlooked, had been rewarded. The world in that small room had finally recognized what I had always known. Dignity, foresight, and moral clarity are more enduring than proximity, expectation, or superficial loyalty. And so, the story closed, not with chaos, not with revenge, but with justice rendered quietly, deliberately, and irrevocably. My family had seen me as powerless, a burden to dismiss, a life to overlook. Yet in the final hour, it was my quiet authority, my deliberate planning, and my unwavering integrity that held absolute sway. The balance had shifted, the lesson delivered, and the legacy secured, a testament to the truth that even when treated as invisible, one can shape the world in ways both profound and enduring. The day ended, the room emptied, and the echoes of realization lingered. The story, once defined by neglect and entitlement, had transformed into a narrative of quiet power and deliberate justice. My voice, though silent for so long, had finally been heard, and the resonance of that truth would remain long after the moment had passed. The ultimate revelation, carefully orchestrated and deeply felt, had taken its place in the memory of all who had witnessed it, leaving a legacy defined not by inheritance, but by the enduring impact of integrity.